Okay, I'm going to show you how you can create a material like this rock that I have applied to this UV sphere. It's pretty easy, so let's jump in. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is grab a texture pack. I like this website because they're all public domain textures. So let's just browse all the assets on the website and scroll down till we see something we like. So this one's pretty good. Let's grab this texture pack, and I'm going to get the lowest resolution, smallest file size for this demo. So obviously if you go larger, your file size is going to grow by quite a bit. So this is 1 gig versus 20 megabytes. We're not making a feature film here, and we're not going to be getting microscopically close to our object, so 2K JPEGs are fine. So let's download those. Okay, so here is the unzipped file that I just downloaded. You can see here that we have an occlusion map. We have a color map, so just to show you what this looks like. Displacement, normal, and roughness. Okay, so let's go ahead and get these into Blender. So in our shading view, I am just going to remove this material. We're going to create a new one. I'm going to rename this and call it Rock 2. Okay, and you can see here that we, by default, have a principled BSDF created for us. So whenever you create a new material, this is the default in Blender, and it's sort of like a Swiss Army knife of material shaders. So all of these settings allow us to get really varied results. So let's go ahead and bring those images in by going to our folder here and just dragging and dropping into the viewport. Okay, so ambient occlusion and color I'm going to put towards the top. We're going to actually mix these together with a mix node, shift click to get them both. And so I like to put them up here because they're going to go down into the base color. Then I've got the roughness, which is going to actually plug right into roughness, and displacement is going to go down here with normal. Okay, so in order to plug these into base color, we need to create a mix node. So I'm going to do Shift A S for search, type mix, and we're going to do mix RGB. We're just doing red, green, blue color information. So you can see sRGB is the color profile that we're using here. I'm going to plug this into color channel 1 and the occlusion here into color channel 2. Now, factor is your ability to sort of switch between which one you're using. So if we were to plug this in just as it stands into the base color here, what you're seeing is effectively, when we put factor to 0, just that first base color map, and then just the ambient occlusion texture map. So if we want these to apply appropriately, we can actually change blending modes and go to multiply. And I'm going to actually put occlusion on top here. And so now that color map is getting some extra shadow information applied. So it's getting a little bit darker in certain areas. Okay, so that's how you can use an occlusion map, given that there is no place to plug it in on our material. All right, so let's full screen this and just jump down into our normal setup. So a normal map is a way for a 2D image to tell the shader where different parts of the object would be in 3D space if it were sort of modeled in 3D. So let's do Shift A, click search, and we are going to add a normal node here. So we want normal map. So we're going to put that here, plug that into normal, plug our color into color, and we're going to just use our UV map that comes with our sphere. And let's see what else. Strength is usually 1. I'm going to change that to 0.3. I find 0.3 works in almost every case to be the best. And now you can see we're getting some bump happening. Especially right here, it's really obvious. So if I disconnected that, for instance, see now it's very flat looking. And let's just reconnect that. Okay, and displacement we can actually use as a way to add additional bump information on our surface. So if we do Shift A, S to search, type bump, this is a way to combine our normal map and our displacement map together. So I'm going to drop that in between the normal and the normal here on our material. So that bump is going to have a channel here where we can plug our displacement into height. Okay, and now you can see there's just a lot more additional information being added that makes it look more visually appealing and maybe more realistic. I'm going to bring the strength down. And we can change that later, but that looks pretty good. The one thing that displacement is designed to do is to actually change the silhouette or the surface shape where our vertices are located at render time. So to do that with cycles, we can copy and paste that displacement node. You could sort of use it, you could use the same one by drawing another line, but just to keep things a little bit simpler, I'm just gonna duplicate that node. And what we're gonna do is figure out how we can plug that into displacement. If you'll notice, I'm plugging it in and nothing is happening. So first thing we have to do is do Shift A, press S, type displace, and we can get our displacement node. Drop that in, and nothing is happening. And that's because our material doesn't have our settings enabled to allow for displacement to work. So if we go to our material settings down here, we can take a look at surface displacement, and right now it's set to bump only. We're going to change that to displacement and bump. Okay, so we're not really seeing a whole lot happening. Okay, so I kind of screwed that up. I plugged that into normal. Let's actually take down the scale here. Let's do 0.1. Maybe just bring it up to 0.3. That might be too high. Let's do 0.2. That looks pretty good. And now you can see the silhouette is actually changing, and those vertices are moving. So if you want to make this more realistic, you have to add more vertices. So if we look at my modifiers, you can see I've got a few added. I have a subsurface modifier added. So if you click on subdivision surface, you add that. I like to keep my viewport low and my render high. But if we disable this, you can see all of our detail here disappears. So if we add that in, now there's more vertices available to be manipulated at render time. We can disconnect this, go up to our render engine and choose Eevee, and it'll sort of reload. So we're still getting a nice PBR material look here, and you can see I've enabled an Eevee ambient occlusion, screen space, reflections. I've increased the shadow cube size to 4096, and I've turned on high bit depth. That's all I've done to the settings here for Eevee. But if we want to get displacement working, we can add a modifier for that. So this will work in cycles as well. So if you add a displace node, and you can see that it gives us a blank, like unconfigured series of settings that we have to configure. So let's click on new, and then the configure buttons to the right that will jump us down to the texture tab, and then we can click on open, and we can drop in our displace image. Okay, so it doesn't actually know where to apply that image. One of the things that we have to do is go back to our modifiers, go back to our displace, and we can go ahead and change our coordinate system to be a UV coordinate system. And we can grab our UV map from our sphere, and we can just take the strength down. Let's just do 0.2 here. And now it's corresponding to where our textures are corresponding. And so that's nice. So it should all match up correctly. That might even be a bit too much. We can do 0.1 here, and that looks pretty good. And you can see the silhouette is actually being modified, which is what we want. So this is how you can get Eevee's displacement working if you're not using cycles. Okay, now let's talk about how we can change the lighting. So to get realistic lighting, you really need either an HDRI image, or you need to do some lighting scenario where you're rendering, you know, maybe outside, because this rock would probably be located outside somewhere. So I just want to show you, I have an HDR image right now that is lighting this object. If I disconnect this, we see there's no light in the scene. I can actually enable my default light, which is pretty bright. And you know, we get this really contrasty fake light. I actually do have the light turned up really high, so we're just gonna maybe bring the power down a little bit here. And so, you know, this doesn't really make sense for outside. This is not what the light looks like outside. So if you want to use an HDR image, I'm just gonna delete this one and I'll show you how to connect that in. So what we have to do is we have to do Shift A, press S to search, and just type environment. And that will bring up the environment node. And now we have to actually get an image texture that will work with this. A regular JPEG really won't do a good job. We need something with higher bit depth. And so to do that, we have to go to HDRI Haven or another website that has HDRI maps, either in EXR or HDR format. So I've already navigated here to this outdoor scene that someone's captured. And this is a 32-bit image that has more information than your computer monitor or your TV can actually show you at any one time. Meaning there's more information in the shadows and in the highlights of this image than are actually visible. And so you can actually adjust that brightness later, but this is gonna give the best result. So I went ahead and downloaded this 2K image. So I'm just gonna go back to Blender here. I'm gonna drop, well, we're not gonna drop it in, we're actually gonna click on open, and I'm gonna drop the image into that dialog box here. So there's my image, click open, and here it is. So you can see here that the image is not a regular image node, it's actually an environment node. So just be careful that you're using the right node. It's not just a regular image node. You can change the type of image that you're using. So if you're not using an equirectangular image, if you're using a mirror ball image, then you want to change that. Most of them that you'll find online are equirectangular, so we'll just use that one. If we connect this up to color, you can see here that it's now contributing more realistic color. Let's turn off our light. We can actually increase the strength here to make it brighter. One thing to note, if you're probably seeing a different look than what I'm seeing because the background on mine has been turned off. If you want to get this same result, you can go to your settings here and go down to film and turn transparent off. So when you turn transparent on, it will get rid of the background. But if you want to see what you're lighting with, then you can keep that turned on for now. And in cycles, it is similar. Under the film setting here, under render settings, we can go down to transparent, turn that on, and now it's transparent in cycles as well. Okay, so there's a couple different ways that we can light this. Another one is we can use what's called a sky texture. So if you're using Blender 2.8, your sky texture node will look like this. We can plug that maybe here into color. You'll notice that it doesn't quite look right, and that's because this doesn't seem to work very well with Eevee. Even if we bring the strength down to 1, it's not really giving us the right result. Let's go back to cycles. Now we're actually getting that sky texture to work properly. So what I'm going to do is disable our displacement node that we were using to get Eevee to work. I'm going to go back to object settings, and we're going to reconnect this and just work in cycles for the time being. And this displacement was maybe a little bit high, so we could do 0.1. And I think that's a little bit more realistic, maybe 0.15. Okay, so let's go back to our world nodes here and zoom in. We have different algorithms that we can use to contribute different color. So if we choose this first one here, we can actually choose the direction by grabbing on the sphere and dragging. And if you go ahead and turn on or uncheck the transparent box, you can actually see the background that's being used to light this. We can choose this one, and you can see there's different colors being used here. And so if you're using Blender 2.9, this is a much more sophisticated node that gives you a much better result. You can actually choose position of the sun in the sky, things like that. But for 2.8 users, you're kind of stuck with using a more limited version of this. It still does an okay job. We can actually go here into... It does an okay job. We can go here into strength and increase that and add some more light to our object. Maybe just change the direction, the normal direction here. We can kind of adjust these settings. So this is turbidity is going to adjust the amount of yellow light that's kind of happening here. I think I liked it with some more blue. There we go. Okay, that looks pretty good. And we didn't really have to do that much work to get our lighting to be configured. If you want to match, for instance, to a specific place and time of day, capturing an outdoor environment of where we're trying to match to is the only way to do that. So in order to actually place this object in this scene, you really have to use the scene itself to contribute light. And you know, that way you're actually getting light contributing from the sun in the right color. So you can see here that color is actually casting over this object in a realistic way. Okay, so that is it for lighting. Okay, one more thing I want to show you is how to change the scale of the texture on this object. So to do that, what we need to do is apply what's called a mapping node. So I'm going to go back here to object, and essentially all of the vectors of all the textures are going to be controlled by the same mapping node. So let's go ahead and do Shift-A-S, type in mapping, drop in the mapping node, and we can go ahead and just connect this up. And what you'll see is it's actually going to start breaking our object, which is fine until we get everything connected here. I'm going to do Control Spacebar just to go full screen, and let's just plug all of these in. We have to do all of our image nodes, so that way nothing is mismatched. There we go. Okay, so that has now connected everything to mapping. If we go back, it ruined kind of the UV map association for our textures to our object. So what we have to do is add that back in. There's a couple different ways to do it. You could do Shift-A-S to search and type in a UV, and we could grab our UV map from our object and just plug that into vector. So that will work. We could do Shift-A-S, get a texture coordinate node, and let's just remove this UV. And we can get our same UV here from that node. And so this is giving us access to that information and other options as well. And so we might use some of these options later depending on what we do with this object. But for now, just now have fun kind of changing the scale of our texture. Because our texture is seamless at the edges, meaning it's tileable, we can change the scale without worrying about seeing edges of our texture. So if I type 4 here, I just sort of click and dragged around all 3 of these before pressing that new value. You can see that it's created more finer detail, and essentially it's repeating the texture. We can't really notice it, but if we did something like 10, we would be able to start recognizing repeated patterns here. So we're going to stick with, I think 2 or 4, maybe 4 is good enough. And so that's how you can easily change the mapping for this. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and disable this background. In settings, down to transparent. I'm just going to enable transparent.